Welcome to LexTalks Legal Topics Simplified, where we like to break down some of those really complex legal ideas into something that's hopefully a little bit easier to understand.
Yeah, absolutely. And today we're going to be diving deep into something that might sound very straightforward at first glance. We're talking about gifts.
Gifts, okay.
Yeah, as law students, you're probably thinking, well, gifts? That seems pretty simple, right?
Yeah,
Yeah.
I think we all kind of have that basic understanding. You give something to someone else,
Right.
you don't expect anything back.
Exactly. But in law, it's not quite that simple.
Oh,
There are a lot of nuances and specific rules and essentials that actually make a gift legally valid, especially when it comes to property law.
okay, so are we saying that just handing someone a present like on their birthday, that's not necessarily a legal gift?
Well, it could be.
Could be, okay.
But there's a lot more to it than just that simple act of handing something over.
Okay, so we need to dive a little deeper then.
Exactly.
All right, I'm ready.
So let's start with the legal definition of a gift, because it is more than just, a casual exchange or a social gesture.
Okay, so what are we looking for in a legal sense?
So there are a few key requirements. First of all, it has to be a transfer of existing ownable property.
Okay.
And this property could be tangible, something you can touch,
Right, like a book.
like a book, exactly a house.
Yeah.
Or it could even be intangible, like an actionable claim.
Okay, now you're going to have to explain that one to me.
We'll get to those a little later.
Okay.
But the key here is it has to be existing and ownable by the donor.
So the person giving the gift.
Exactly, the person giving the gift.
Okay.
The second requirement is that this transfer has to be voluntary.
Okay.
The donor has to give the gift willingly
Right.
without any pressure or coercion.
So no one's twisting their arm,
Exactly.
making them give this gift.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Finally, it has to be done without consideration,
Okay.
meaning the donor doesn't get anything of value in return.
Okay, so that's the difference between like a sale
Exactly.
or a trade.
A sale, a barter, any kind of exchange where you're getting something back.
Right.
This has to be purely gratuitous.
Out of the goodness of their heart.
Precisely.
Okay.
So just to recap those three essential elements.
Yep.
Existing ownable property,
Okay.
voluntary transfer,
Mm.
and no consideration.
All right, I think I've got those.
Yeah.
But now you mentioned this word ownable.
Yes.
What exactly does that mean? I mean, can you gift anything?
That's a good question. So as a general rule, the property must be something that can be owned and transferred.
Okay.
This could include tangible things, as we said.
Yeah, the books and houses.
Exactly. Cars, jewelry.
Okay.
But it can also include intangible things.
Okay, so you said like intellectual property.
Intellectual property rights,
Yeah.
shares in a company.
Yeah.
Things like that.
Interesting.
Now, you asked about debts.
Yeah. Could I gift my debt to somebody?
So a debt itself might not be considered a gift.
Go.
But what you can gift is the right to claim that debt. It's called an actionable claim.
Actionable claim.
Yes.
So it's not the actual debt, but the right to go after that debt.
Exactly. It's the right to pursue that debt legally.
So I could technically give someone the right to collect a debt that's owed to me.
Precisely. And that is recognized as a valid form of property that can be transferred as a gift.
Wow, this is really fascinating. It's way more complex than I initially thought.
It is, and it gets even more interesting when we start talking about how these gifts are actually created.
Okay, because we've got these three essential elements, but how do we actually make it a legal gift?
Right. So the law distinguishes between two main categories of property:
Okay.
movable and immovable property.
All right, so movable like things you can move,
Exactly.
and immovable like land and buildings?
Precisely. And the way a gift is created differs depending on which category the property falls under.
Okay, so let's break those down.
Sure.
What are we looking at when we talk about these two different categories?
So movable property, as we said, includes things that can be physically moved. So think books, furniture, cars, even company shares.
All right, so things that I could pick up and take with me.
Exactly.
Okay, and then immovable property.
Immovable property refers to things that are fixed in place,
Like a house?
like a house, land, buildings, or even things attached to those buildings.
Okay, so fixtures and things like that.
Exactly.
All right, so we've got our two categories,
Yes,
and I'm guessing the rules are different depending on which category we're talking about.
you got it.
Okay,
Yeah.
so let's start with immovable property.
All right, so when someone wants to gift immovable property, like a piece of land or a building, the law requires that this transfer be done through a registered instrument.
Okay, a registered instrument, what does that mean?
So it's essentially a formal written document that outlines the details of the gift,
Okay.
who is giving it, who is receiving it, and a clear description of the property itself.
So it's not enough to just write a little note and say, here's my house.
Not when it comes to immovable property.
Okay.
The law requires a much higher level of formality to prevent any future disputes and to ensure clarity.
To make sure everything's clear.
Exactly. So this registered instrument needs to be signed by the donor
Okay.
in the presence of at least 2 witnesses.
2 witnesses. Okay, so just like we see in the movies.
Exactly like you see in those legal dramas.
All right, so we've got our document.
Yeah.
It's signed by the donor.
Right.
We've got our 2 witnesses.
Yes.
What have we done?
Almost. There's one crucial step left. This registered instrument also needs to be registered with the appropriate government authority.
So we got to take it to a government office.
Exactly. Usually the office that handles property records.
So it's not just enough to create this document.
Mhm.
It has to be officially on record.
Precisely. And this registration process serves a few purposes.
Oh.
First, it makes the gift public record.
So everyone knows.
Anyone can verify that this transfer of ownership has happened.
Okay.
Second, it helps prevent fraud.
Right.
Ensures that the same property isn't gifted multiple times.
Right. So there are no shenanigans going on.
Exactly. So it's all about creating a clear and legally binding record.
So everything's above board and everyone knows what's happening.
Precisely. The law takes the transfer of immovable property very seriously.
Yeah.
And this formal process helps protect the rights of both the donor and the donor.
Okay, that makes a lot of sense because we're talking about something pretty big
Exactly.
when we talk about land or a building.
Right.
So, okay, we've got immovable property, but what about movable property? Is it the same kind of process?
This is where things get a bit more flexible.
Okay.
For movable property, you actually have 2 options.
Yeah.
You can still use a registered instrument
If you want to.
if you want to follow all those steps.
Yeah.
But there's also a simpler, more traditional method,
Okay.
delivery.
So just handing it over.
Exactly.
Okay.
You know, think about giving someone a birthday present.
Right.
You hand it to them, the gift is complete.
Easy peasy.
In the eyes of the law, this physical handover is often enough
Okay.
to create a valid gift of movable property.
So no paperwork, no registration.
Not necessarily. While delivery is sufficient in many cases, it's still wise to have some evidence of the transaction.
Okay.
Witnesses can play a role here,
Okay.
or even a simple written note acknowledging the gift.
Okay. So just something to show that this actually did happen.
Exactly, something to back it up.
All right. So we've got our 3 elements of a gift.
Right?
We've got the procedures for creating those gifts, depending on whether it's movable or immovable property.
Right.
But what about the person receiving the gift?
The done.
The done. But do they have any say in this whole process?
This is an important point that often gets overlooked. A gift isn't solely about the donor's intentions.
Right.
The done plays a crucial role as well.
Okay. So I can't just force a gift on someone,
You cannot.
even if I think it's a great gift.
Even if it's the best gift in the world, the done has the right to accept or refuse a gift.
There.
It's not a one-sided transaction.
All right. So the law recognizes that you can't just force something on someone. All right. So how does acceptance work?
Acceptance can be express
Okay.
or implied.
Okay. Explain those.
So express acceptance would be the done saying, yes, I accept this gift.
Very clear.
Very clear. Implied acceptance is a little bit more nuanced.
Okay. So for example.
If you give someone a bike and they start riding it,
Okay.
that could be considered implied acceptance.
So they're showing through their actions.
Exactly. The law looks at their actions to determine whether they've truly accepted the gift.
Got it. Now, what if the done changes their mind?
Ooh.
After they've accepted, can they give it back?
That's where things get a little tricky generally once a gift is accepted.
Yeah.
It's considered complete.
And it's done.
It's done. However,
However.
there are certain circumstances
Oh.
where a gift can be revoked or returned.
Okay.
And that's something we'll discuss a little bit later.
All right. So we've got our 3 essential elements. We've got the procedures for creating the gift.
Yeah.
And now we know that the done actually has to agree to receive this gift.
Ah.
This is definitely a lot more complex than I originally thought when we said we were talking about gifts.
It is, but we've laid a good foundation now.
Okay.
And now it's time to move on to the more nuanced aspects.
Ooh. The nuances.
The situations where a seemingly completed gift can actually be suspended or even revoked.
Okay. So we're going to talk about taking back gifts.
We are.
This is where it gets really good.
This is where it gets interesting.
I'm ready.
Welcome back.
Okay, so are we ready to talk about gift revocation? This is the part I'm really curious about. Like, you give a gift, and then you decide, actually, no, I want it back.
Yeah, it's really interesting because in law, there's this general principle that once a gift is given, it's irrevocable.
It's done.
You can't take it back.
Okay.
But then the law also says, well, hold on, there are some exceptional circumstances
Uh-huh.
where you actually can kind of hit the rewind button on that gift.
Okay, so there are some
There
exceptions
are exceptions.
to the no take-backs rule.
Exactly. And these exceptions are really interesting because they often highlight some really fundamental legal principles
Okay.
about fairness,
Okay.
equity,
Yeah.
upholding the intentions of the parties involved.
Okay, I'm ready to dive into these exceptions.
All right, let's do it. So one of the most straightforward situations is when both the donor and the don mutually agree to revoke the gift.
Okay, so they both say, yeah, let's just undo this.
Exactly. They basically enter into a new agreement
Okay.
to undo the old one.
Okay, so if everyone's happy with this unwinding of the gift, then the law is cool with it.
Absolutely. The law respects the autonomy of the parties.
Right.
If they both agree to undo it, no problem.
So that makes sense.
Mhm.
But what happens if the donor doesn't want to give the gift back? Can the donor just say, well, I've changed my mind, I want it back?
That's where things get a little bit more complex, unilateral revocation,
Okay.
where the donor is acting alone. That's only possible in very specific situations.
Okay.
And one of those situations is when the gift was given with a specific condition attached.
Oh, so there were strings attached.
Exactly, and that condition hasn't been met. So these conditions are usually clearly stated
Okay.
in the gift deed or the registered instrument.
Right. The document.
Exactly.
Wow.
So, for example, let's say a wealthy individual gifts a large sum of money to a university, but they do it with the condition that the money is going to be used to establish a scholarship for underprivileged students.
So the gift comes with a purpose.
A very specific purpose.
And if that purpose isn't fulfilled, then what happens?
Well, if the university, for whatever reason, doesn't set up that scholarship, then the donor might actually have grounds to revoke the gift. It's all about upholding the terms of the agreement.
Okay, so this makes me think about that case from the Bombay High Court, the Atmaram Sakaram Kalki versus Vaman Janardhan Kashelikar case that we
Yes.
talked about earlier.
A classic example.
Wasn't that a situation where a gift was revoked because there was this expectation that wasn't met?
You're exactly right.
Okay.
So in that case, some elderly parents gifted property to their son with this kind of implicit expectation that he would take care of them in their old age.
Right, and he didn't.
And he didn't.
So even though it wasn't written down in the gift deed,
Right, there was no formal written condition.
the court recognized that there was this kind of understanding
This understanding.
between the parties.
Absolutely. So the son's failure to provide that care was seen as a breach of that implicit condition,
Okay.
and that gave the parents the right to revoke the gift.
Wow. So it's really important to be clear about what's expected.
Absolutely clear communication, even in these seemingly simple gift transactions.
Right, because even though we think gifts are simple, there's actually a lot going on behind the scenes.
There's a lot of legal baggage that comes with a gift.
All right, so we've talked about mutual agreement. We've talked about conditions as grounds for revoking a gift. Are there any other situations where a donor might be able to get their gift back?
Yes. There are a couple more, but let's shift gears a little bit and talk about movable property for a second.
Yeah.
Imagine an antique collector gifts a rare artifact to a museum
Okay.
with the understanding that it's going to be prominently displayed in their collection.
Right, so they want people to see it.
They want the public to enjoy this piece of history.
Yeah.
But let's say the museum runs out of space,
Okay.
or they change their priorities,
Right.
and they decide to just store this artifact away
Oh, no.
in their archives, never to be seen by the public.
Okay, so that kind of goes against the whole idea of giving this gift.
It completely contradicts the donor's intentions.
Right.
So in that situation, the donor might actually have a case for arguing that the museum's actions
Yeah.
constitute a breach of trust, even though there was no formal written condition.
Wow. Okay, so even though it's movable property,
Right.
we said delivery is typically enough.
Yeah.
There might still be some recourse for the donor if the don isn't using the gift in the way it was intended.
That's a very important point. Gift law doesn't operate in a vacuum.
Okay.
Principles of trust.
Right.
Good faith. Equity.
Hmm.
They all play a role, especially when we're talking about situations that aren't explicitly covered by specific legal provisions.
Okay, so it's not just about ticking the boxes.
Not always.
It's also about what's fair and just.
Exactly.
All right, so we've talked about mutual agreement, unfulfilled conditions, breach of trust. Are there any other exceptions?
There are a couple more, but they kind of delve into more specialized areas of law.
Okay.
So one of them involves gifts made in contemplation of death,
Oh.
often referred to by the Latin phrase donatio mortis causa.
Donatio mortis causa. Okay, sounds very serious.
It is serious. So these are gifts that are made when someone believes that they're nearing the end of their life.
Okay.
So it's kind of like a way to distribute property outside of a formal will. So think of it as a parting gift,
Okay.
but with a legal framework.
Right.
And because these gifts blur the lines between a gift and a will, they have their own set of rules and their own potential for revocation.
Okay.
For example, if the donor unexpectedly recovers from their illness, they might have the right to revoke that gift.
Right, because the whole reason they were giving it was because they thought they weren't going to be around.
Exactly.
Now they are.
Right.
Okay, so this makes me think about how connected different areas of law can be.
Absolutely.
We're talking about gifts, but then we're also talking about wills and inheritance.
Family law.
Yeah.
Contract law, even.
Yeah.
It's all intertwined.
All right, so this has been a really great overview of gift revocation. We've gone from those mutual agreements to conditions to even these gifts made in contemplation of death.
And through all these scenarios, we've seen how those basic legal principles
Yeah.
of fairness, equity, and the intent of the parties,
Right.
they all come into play.
Okay, so before we wrap things up, I'm curious about one more aspect.
Okay.
We mentioned personal laws
Yeah.
earlier.
Right.
Do those have any impact on gift revocation?
That's a great question, and it brings up another layer of complexity when we're talking about Indian law.
Okay.
Personal laws based on religion and custom can influence various legal aspects, including gifts.
So depending on someone's religious background,
Yeah,
the rules about revoking a gift might be different.
precisely. So, for example, under Muslim personal law, gifts are known as hiba,
Okay.
and they have their own set of rules regarding revocation.
So as lawyers, we have to be aware of not just the general rules, but also how different personal laws might apply.
Absolutely. It's all part of developing that holistic legal perspective.
Right, we have to look at the whole picture.
The whole picture.
Okay, so this deep dive has really opened my eyes to how complex gift law can be.
It's definitely more than just simple giving and receiving.
Way more.
There's a lot more to it.
Okay, so before we move on to our final part, is there anything else you want to add about gift revocation? Any final thoughts for our aspiring lawyers?
I think the key takeaway here is that gift law, while it seems straightforward on the surface, it has layers of complexity, and the details really matter. Whether it's a carefully worded condition in a gift deed or an unspoken understanding between the parties,
Right.
those details can make all the difference in a legal dispute.
So it's not enough to just know the general rules we have to really pay attention to the specifics of each case.
Exactly, and that's where those critical thinking skills that you're developing in law school become so important.
right.
It's not just about memorizing the law, it's
Wow.
about analyzing those situations,
Yeah.
understanding the intentions of the parties,
Mm-hmm.
and applying the law in a way that achieves a just outcome.
Okay, I like that.
So we've explored a lot of ground today,
We have.
from the essential elements of a valid gift
Yeah.
to these various situations where those gifts can be suspended or revoked.
Right.
And through it all, we've seen how legal principles and practical considerations,
Right.
they really intertwine to create this fascinating area of law.
This has been great. I feel like I've learned so much.
I'm glad.
So are we ready to move on to our final part?
Let's wrap up this deep dive.
All right, let's do it. All right, so we're back for the final part of our deep dive into gift law.
We've covered a lot of ground, haven't we?
We've gone from defining what makes a gift legally valid to all those crazy situations where you can actually take back a gift.
Yeah, it's been quite a journey through the Transfer of Property Act.
It has. But before we let all our law students out there go off and, conquer their studies,
Right.
let's connect this back to the bigger picture.
Okay.
Why should they care about mastering gift law?
That's the key question, isn't it?
It is.
It's more than just, passing exams.
Right.
Gift law is actually surprisingly relevant to a wide range of legal areas.
Okay, so give us some examples. How might a law student actually use this knowledge in the real world?
So let's say you're dealing with a property dispute.
Okay.
Years down the line, a seemingly simple gift that was made years ago could suddenly become like this key piece of evidence in determining who actually owns what.
So something that seemed straightforward at the time could turn into a legal nightmare later on.
Exactly. Or think about family law.
Okay.
Disputes over inheritance often involve understanding, past gifts,
Right.
whether those gifts were valid or whether they were revocable.
It's like those law school hypotheticals where one tiny detail ends up being the whole case.
Exactly. And that's the thing about law.
Yeah.
Everything's connected.
Right.
And a solid understanding of gift law can really give you that edge.
Okay.
in analyzing situations and spotting those crucial details.
So we've got property disputes, family matters, even those tricky exam questions.
But it goes beyond that.
Okay, where else?
Think about business transactions.
Okay.
Sometimes what looks like a gift on the
Yeah.
surface might actually be part of a more complex deal
Wow.
with hidden conditions.
So a business might try to dress up a transaction as a gift to, avoid taxes or something.
Exactly, for legal advantages.
Hmm.
So being able to figure out
Yeah.
whether it's a genuine gift or something else entirely,
Right.
that's a really valuable skill.
So it's not just about knowing the rules, it's about applying them to these real-world situations that aren't always so clear-cut.
Exactly, and that's where those critical thinking skills that
Right.
you're developing in law school really come into play.
Okay.
Gift law is a fantastic training ground for honing those skills.
So you've got to look at the facts,
Yeah.
you've got to understand what the parties were thinking, and then apply the law in a way that makes sense.
In a way that's fair and just.
Right. Okay. And let's not forget the human element here,
Oh, absolutely.
because gift law often involves, personal relationships, family ties.
Emotions.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Because even a well-intentioned gift can turn into a huge fight.
Absolutely, if things go wrong.
Yeah.
And as lawyers, you'll often be dealing with clients who are navigating these emotionally charged situations.
Right.
So a sensitive and nuanced understanding of gift law
Yeah.
can really help you guide them effectively.
Yeah. This has been great. I really appreciate you walking us through all these different aspects of gift law.
My pleasure.
Any final words of wisdom for our listeners as they head off into their legal careers?
I'd say embrace the complexity. The law is a fascinating puzzle, and all the pieces are connected. The more you learn, the more you'll see those connections
Okay.
and appreciate just how intricate this system really is.
Awesome. We'll keep those legal minds sharp.
Absolutely.
Never stop exploring new areas of the law.
And remember, the learning never really ends.
It does.
There's always something new to discover.
Right, especially with the law always changing.
Exactly.
Well, thank you for joining us on LexTalks.
It's been a pleasure.
We'll see you on our next legal adventure.